Everyone, and welcome back. Let's go ahead and let's dive into Module 76, which will be talking primarily about group behavior. So let's start off by talking about how is our behavior affected by others. So allow me to pose a question. If we are given a task to complete, will our performance on said task be affected by having somebody else in the room? Some people would say no, but according to a psychologist named Norman Triplett, in an 1898 study, the answer was yes. Norman Triplett gave participants adolescents at this point, gave them a task to wind a fishing reel, either in the presence of somebody doing the same thing or by themselves. When given said tasks to wind the reel, adolescents would actually wind that reel faster in the presence of another person who was completing the same task. This type of effect can be seen in simple groups, which is like one person with another, or like a small group of 3 people, and in more complex groups with larger amounts of people, like a classroom of 24 or a big crowd of 50 or more people. We've seen these group effects both in small groups, one-on-one, a group of 3, a group of 4, and in bigger complex groups. Triplett's finding is what's known as social facilitation. Social facilitation is the improved performance on simple or well-learned tasks. In the presence of others, basically. What we have found is that with social facilitation, we see improvement primarily on simple tasks or tasks that people know how to do very well. Also, I apologize if you hear any scuffling. My little cat T'Challa is in the room and is currently falling asleep. Sleep on top of some of my papers. So if you hear any shuffling of paper, that's what that is. But social facilitation primarily shows as improvement on simple tasks or tasks we know very well. So something like threading beads onto a cord, we would see improvement on that because that's a relatively simple task for us. With difficult or new tasks, we find the opposite occurs with social facilitation. People actually perform worse on those types of tasks when observers are watching or others are working on the same task in the same area. Basically, if you're trying to do something difficult or new, social facilitation, having a person nearby or having a person also completing the same thing right next to you may make that task more difficult. Now, both of these effects, both the improvement on simple and tasks we know very well, and the difficulty found in, like the worst performance found with difficult or new tasks, can be explained by what's known as arousal theory. When we have someone observing us, we become more energized. That energizing effect strengthens what would be our most likely response. On a simpler task or a task that we know very well, our most likely response is going to be the correct one. However, on a difficult or a newer task, we may not know what would be the correct answer, and the correct answer will not most likely be our likely response. We see this effect also whenever it comes to sports teams, actually. This social facilitation actually occurs in that there is a noticeable home advantage that is shown in studies of more than 250,000 college and professional athletic events. Home teams generally win about 6 in 10 games. Some people would say that this is because of the social facilitation of a home crowd watching you play. Now, with social facilitation, the best thing to keep in mind to understand social facilitation is what you do well, you're likely to do better in front of an audience. What you find difficult may be all but impossible in front of an audience. As long as you keep in mind that what you do well or what you do simply, you can do better, and what you find difficult or what you don't know how to do, you'll probably do worse on in front of an audience, you can understand social facilitation. Now, we've also seen social facilitation in crowds. Social facilitation can help to energize us and strengthen our reactions whenever we are in a crowd. Something that would be mildly amusing, like a joke, becomes hilarious in a group. People have talked about this. Comedians primarily know that a good house is a full one because the energy of some people in the crowd will kind of feed off of each other, in that we will be more energized and will be more receptive to what's going on. However, this is not just in the good type of way, like something mildly amusing becoming absolutely hilarious. The opposite is also true. Something considered bad could become horrific in a group. This is also the case when what was found when participants were seated close to each other in an experiment by a researcher named Schiffenbauer in 1976. They had participants seated close to one another and interact with each other. When they were seated close, they liked a friendly person more and disliked an unfriendly person even more. So that response to the person sitting close was heightened by the fact that they were closer in proximity. Now, social facilitation is all well and good, but we also have other ways that crowds affect us. We now know what happens when people perform on tasks with an audience, but what happens whenever people perform tasks in a group? Do people put in more or less effort? What we have found is that people tend to put in less effort when they believe that they are in a group activity than when they believe they are by themselves. Now, when participants were blindfolded and believed that they were pulling a rope with a group, they only exerted about 82% as much effort as they did when they believed they were alone. This was a study done at the University of Massachusetts, by the way. The same case happened whenever people were blindfolded and believed that they were clapping alongside a group. When they believed that they were alongside a group, they produced 1/3 less noise compared to when they thought they were by themselves. So what we've really noticed is that people tend to put in less effort whenever they believe they're in a group than they are by themselves. This lack of effort being put in is what's known as social loafing, or the tendency for people in a group to exert less effort when putting their efforts towards obtaining a common goal than whenever they're individually accountable. We found 3 things that tend to cause or facilitate social loafing. People acting as part of a group will feel less accountable, and thus they'll worry less about what others think about their efforts because they feel less accountable about them. Group members may also view their individual contributions as disposable, and because those contributions are disposable, it doesn't matter my part in this, anybody can complete my part, they may not put as much effort into something that could be considered dispensable, that could be considered able to be done by someone else. One last thing that tends to cause social loafing is when group members share equally in the benefits, regardless of how much they contribute. Some may slack off in this instance because the benefits that they share isn't tied to how much they contribute to said project. So, while being in a group can energize people, or it can diminish feelings of responsibility, we have one more combination of factors. This process is called de-individualization, and de-individualization stems from the combination of both social facilitation and social loafing. This energizing effect of crowds and large groups, and the loss of responsibility that comes with being part of a group. De-individualization specifically is the combination of the loss of self-awareness and the loss of self-restraint. This is usually whenever a group provides both arousal and anonymity. De-individualization thrives, for better or for worse, in many different settings. One example of this is we see these with tribal warriors who adorn themselves with face paints or masks. They are actually more likely than those with exposed faces to be violent towards captured enemies. We also see this on the internet, where the anonymity of something like a username or an icon can serve as a mask and allow for some awful behavior to take place online. So, let's go ahead and talk about group polarization. We've examined the conditions whenever being in the presence of other people can motivate us or make us reduce our effort or things like that. But we've also seen, whenever we're talking about groups, that interacting with others can similarly have both bad and good effects. And one of these effects is known as group polarization. So, as is expected over time, minor differences between groups tend to grow into major differences. We've researched, and these occur in things such as gendered groups and in groups with a focus on a subject, such as businesses or arts or things like that. But so there's no real limitation for what type of group this involves. Group polarization occurs in. All groups see minor differences between different groups grow into major differences. This occurs because of group polarization, the enhancement of a group's prevailing inclinations through discussion within the group. Basically, as we discuss beliefs and attitudes we bring to the group, these can grow stronger as we discuss them with like-minded individuals. This can be very beneficial. In the case of self-help groups, having somebody who is like-minded about wanting to recover or to do better or things like that can be very beneficial and can help keep people on track for staying with a self-help program. However, it can also be negative. This is where things such as extremists can take place, as people can become very extreme with the ideas that grow from this group polarization. This benefit and negative can be especially the case on the internet, where online communities can encounter or create this level of group polarization. Online communities can almost create virtual town halls where people can kind of isolate themselves from those who their perspective differs. People can read blogs that reinforce their views, and those blogs will link to similar subjects until you just have a nest of people saying the same opinion. And this isn't a judge on that opinion in particular, but it is an instance where group polarization can occur. It really just depends upon what's being discussed in that community. And it's just important to know that, hey, this is just one area in which group polarization can occur. And by linking and magnifying the inclinations of like-minded people, it's important for us to realize how groups can influence us. What kind of influence does being in a group bring? It can be bad, but it can also be incredibly good, especially whenever you're part of a group that wants to help. That brings forth shared concerns, different ideas. Another issue that comes with groups is what's known as groupthink. Group interactions can not only influence our personal decisions, but it can also influence our public decisions too. One example of this is through groupthink. And groupthink is the power of the desire to keep a harmony in a group. Basically, the desire for harmony in a decision-making group overrides a realistic appraisal of alternatives. If a group is harmonious, even if the decisions that are being made are questionable, people may hesitate to voice their concerns out of fear of disrupting the social atmosphere. Now, this isn't always the case. This absolutely is not always the case that every decision-making group is subject to groupthink. Sorry, I'm just getting some water. Groupthink is able to be disrupted. Now, groupthink can be disrupted primarily by having a leader be very welcoming to others' opinions. Whenever a leader or the group itself invites expert opinions and critiques to the problem being solved or developing plans. And whenever people are assigned to specifically identify possible problems with solutions that are being came up with. These are different ways that groupthink can be disrupted, because if various opinions becomes a group norm, then the harmonious atmosphere is not disruptive whenever someone says, hey, I think this idea has a problem to it. Now, I want you to keep in mind that in general, working with groups is a benefit. In general, two heads are better than one whenever it comes to solving many problems. Because of the fact that whenever you're working in a group, the presentation of various perspectives can offer either creative or superior outcomes to working by oneself. Along with this, we as individuals do have power in social groups. This is kind of called minority influence. And now minority influence specifically is the power of 1 to 2 individuals' ability to sway a majority. If you have 1 or 2 individuals that consistently express a controversial attitude or an unusual perceptual judgment, over time, people will start to side with that person. As long as they are holding firmly to their beliefs. If people waffle on their beliefs, if people don't stay with what they believe is true, we tend to run into a lack of belief amongst these groups. But minority influence does show that if you have 1 or 2 dissenters in a group and they are hard stuck in their beliefs and hold firmly to their position, they will become influential over a specific group. Now that we know some aspects of group interactions, let's talk about what could be considered the largest group interaction: culture. Culture and cultural influences. So, culture itself is the behaviors, ideas, values, and traditions shared by a group of people and transmitted from one generation to the next, either these ideas, behaviors, etc., are taught to the child at an early age, like passing down from a mother or a grandmother or a teacher or something amongst those lines to the child, or it is something that is taught as a societal norm. Human beings seems very specifically designed to enable culture. Other animals have exhibited rudimentary examples of culture. Primates have a local custom of tool use, grooming, courtship, etc. But human beings, in particular, have a culture that supports our own survival by specifically enabling the presence of social systems and economic systems that give us a little bit more of an edge. Thanks to our ability to use language, we enjoy primarily a preservation of innovation, i.e., innovations are passed down between generations and cultures. Cultures also allow us to enable more divisions of labor, splitting tasks to complete a group objective. The creation of your textbook, for example, is one of them. We had multiple writers, multiple editors, publishers, people designing book covers, things like that. All of these people came together to form one book, to form one textbook for you guys to use to study psychology. Our cultures allow for differences to be illustrated greatly. Differences in language, differences in monetary system, in sports. What type of fork do we eat with? What side of the road do we drive on? But it also allows for the similarities to be shown between our cultures. How do we communicate? Our ability to exchange currency for things. How a child plays. How we eat. And driving with agreed upon rules. All of these things help us to show just both how our culture differs and how all humans are just kind of similar, even with cultural differences. Now, riding with a unified culture, a culture you've been raised in, is a lot like biking with the wind. We don't notice our interactions with culture. Culture is something that is very quietly in the background. We don't really pay attention to it. Now, when we go against cultural norms, we can feel resistance. And a cultural norm is an understood rule for accepted and expected behavior. The British people have a norm for orderly waiting in line. Many South Asian countries only use the right hand fingers for eating. Sometimes social expectations can seem oppressive in the way, for example, in the way that some cultures end up dressing. But social norms give us understood rules for accepted and expected behavior and allow us all to have some level of known behavior that's normal for us. Now, when cultures collide, these cultural norms are often confusing. Do we greet people by shaking hands, or do we greet people by kissing each other on the cheek? The answer depends on the surrounding culture. When do we clap? When do we bow? How do we order at a restaurant? What sort of gestures and compliments are appropriate? Are all things that we have to adapt to whenever we integrate ourselves into another culture. If a culture's norms are incredibly different from our own, we can feel a level of culture shock as our brains try to adapt to a new set of cultural machinery. For example, people from the Mediterranean cultures see Northern Europeans as efficient but cold and preoccupied with punctuality. People from Japan have found them growing impatient whenever they visit Indonesia, where clocks keep a far less accurate time, and the pace of life is more leisurely there. It's often the case that culture shock occurs whenever we try to discuss things like pace of life and things like differing senses of punctuality. The last thing to talk about, really, is that cultures do change rapidly. Cultures are very complex, and each one competes for resources and thus evolves over time. The 1300s is separated from a modern Britain by only 25 generations, but the two trying to converse would have such great difficulty doing so. And this is especially the case from the period from the 1960s to now, as we are seeing a greater and even more rapid change in culture and cultural norms. Middle-class people today fly to places they only once read about. They enjoy the ability of air conditioning housing, online shopping, electronic communication via cell phones, and getting out more than twice as often as their grandparents did back in the 1960s. Many minority groups today also enjoy more human rights than what was previously allowed. Now, we share and are seeing a greater and even more rapidly changing culture and cultural norms than anybody has ever expected. Think of the changes between the cultures of your parents or grandparents and your own. What's changed positively? What's changed negatively? If you talk to your parent or to your grandparents, to your parents or to your grandparents, I bet you guys can create a long list of the things that have changed in just a short amount of time, whether that be 20 years or 40 years. Even look at how things have changed just a year from now. Regardless of all of this, the main takeaway is that from all of this is that groups are very influencing. Whether it is in a small group of 2 to 3 people, whether it is in a large group of 50 to 100 people, or if it is in a massive group, such as a cultural group. Groups do have influence in our lives, and it's important for us to keep that in mind. However, it's also important for us not to let that reason run away with us. We still do have power individually, but it's important to understand the potential mechanisms that are occurring whenever we exist in a group. And with that, that's actually about it for this lecture this week. This week talking about groups. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. My cell phone number and my email address, as always, are provided in every assignment if you have any questions. And please, stay safe, everyone. Make sure that you are all doing good, and please complete the assignment for this week. Have a good rest of your day.